Morning, last night.
Oh my
Late yesterday
goodness. Another boy. 8 now. Oh my goodness, that was a big one.
afternoon. Yeah. She's been fine. Just kind of a slow labor. It was face up rather than face down, so it made the labor harder.
Oh, another boy.
But another boy.
Oh my.
So I got 6 grandsons and 2 granddaughters.
Oh my goodness.
So my girls had boys. We had all
Isn't that
girls.
weird?
So my girls are having boys.
Oh my goodness. I'm not a science.
But they go next week. We're good.
All right, you can go ahead and turn to Colossians. Colossians. We'll be reading a passage from Colossians in just a moment to begin our thoughts. But if you don't have the lesson sheet for this morning, you can grab it in the back. It's on the New Age movement, so get ready for the most fun Bible class you've ever participated in. It's kind of it's a very interesting, somewhat nebulous topic, honestly. It's probably one of the most difficult topics I've studied for, just because I feel like it's very broad. There's just so much involved. And I think for really a purposeful reason, and we'll get into that as we look at some of these questions, but the New Age movement is what we'll be talking about. You can kind of tell that from some of the questions that this is a bit dated, the material, but still, everything under the sun is applicable when you bring the Bible to it. So, before we get started, we're going to have a word of prayer. And Greg, would you lead us in that?
Thank you for the privilege and honor to be here today. Study thy word, gain knowledge. We thank the Father for the church gathered here. Pray for those of the guidance in this Bible study. Pray for those who are not as fortunate as we are to be here that are on suffering and surgeries to do as well. Now we with the Father who won't their service.
Amen. All right, so Colossians 2. Colossians 2, does someone want to read verse 8 for us? Colossians 2 and verse 8.
Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ.
All right, so honestly, from this verse, there's a lot of tie-ins to, I think, Judaizing teachers and trying to bring people in. But there's also other things that are touched on, all different philosophies that are coming in. Asceticism, I think is how you say it, was kind of rearing its ugly head for many of the Christians that were living at this point and that Paul is having to write about. So it kind of hits everything, really every angle at which the gospel could be affronted, could be battled against or opposed in any way. So obviously it would apply to pretty much any issue that you could think of that might hurt the faith of some. And I just accidentally messed up. Here we go. So getting into the preliminary thoughts, I don't know how much of the lesson we'll get through. We may get through most of it today, but beginning with some of the basic understanding of this movement. What exactly is the New Age movement? How would you define it? Question 1. Yeah. And so I do think that a lot of, I mean, again, it seems a little bit broad because it brings in several different religious backgrounds and spiritual backgrounds. So it is kind of a collection of beliefs and practices focusing in a lot on enlightenment, which we'll talk about more, but especially that idea of enlightenment. There are a lot of ways that people think that they are enlightened. And just because we may not be used to the term New Age movement, there are a lot of people who still have these kinds of ideas. And so, and again, we'll get into this more, but it has just a background of a lot of different things: Hinduism, Buddhism, just paganism. Really, I think that's the best way to describe it. If you want to just give a general definition, it's paganism. It may have bits and pieces of the gospel, like Paul is talking about in Colossians chapter 2, but it has a very pagan background, or at least they're bringing the world religions into this with like pantheism at the time. But what is the commonality between all of these beliefs that we just kind of mentioned?
God is left out.
Yeah, at the very
It's relying on human wisdom, human philosophy, human traditions, mysticism, the mysterious, the thick, cloudy, what if type philosophy, that sort of thing. Just conjuring up things on your own to satisfy your own needs, I guess, if you want to describe it that way. It's relying on man to take care of your spiritual needs rather than relying upon God.
Yes, and that's if you want to generally answer the question, generally explain what we're talking about, I think that's the gist. It's a philosophy that at the heart of it, and there are some people who would probably say, well, I'm not discounting God, but it's like the agnostic. You've picked your side. You can't say, well, there could be a God. You've picked your side. You're not on God's. And so in the same way, even if you try to act like, well, maybe there is an ultimate creator like you believe in, Christian, that they're still not on God's side. That's just kind of excusing away some confronting language, or maybe argumentative discussions that people would have with us when we're trying to talk about, the standard, the truth of morality.
I believe that it elevates man to the divine.
Yeah. Yes.
And just to kind of piggyback on what Steve said, that we become the divine.
Yes. I think that is the gist of it. And kind of getting ahead of myself, but it's swapping out. It's making creation in the place that only the creator, God, should be. It's flipping it around. Are there people today who make creation God? Yeah, there are lots of people. Yeah, there are lots of people who make the creation their God, not just in the most easily paganistic, identifiable ways as you see in the first century with idols and things like that, carving statues out of trees and stones and things like that. But there are people who talk about the environment like it is. I hate the term Mother Nature, but a lot of people talk like that because I think they believe it to a degree. So there are still people. Some of these questions, they may be a little bit dated, but there's a lot that can still apply for today. So we don't want to miss out on the main points. All right, so
Luke, when you first started, you called it New
Age.
Generation. Is it really new?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back and look at mankind, all the way through, from Genesis all the way through, they've done the same thing.
Yeah. It got a new facelift, but that doesn't mean it's new. So why is this why is this philosophy so popular these days in question 2?
Well, I think our culture today, our young kids today, they want to just do whatever they want to do. And I think it fits into whatever they want to do. If they want to be this religion or that religion, or follow this God or that God, well, they go right ahead and do it. I mean, I don't think they have any depth in in the scriptures or God, either one.
That's kind of that. And there are a few things you said there, but that I think is one of the main things that you said at the very end. It's to kind of top it off. I think it's lazy. It's a lazy way of going about spirituality. You don't have to do that much in-depth thinking. It's just, well, yes, I'm spiritual, but what do people often say when they want to have Christianity but not actually do what Christ demands? They usually say, well, I'm what, but not what.
I'm a believer.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody whispered it at different times, but everybody got it. I'm spiritual, just not religious. And it's lazy. It's lazy. And I think it's the exact same when it comes to a lot of, young people today. They just want to accept the easiest thing that makes them religious or spiritual, but they don't have to do much. They don't have many responsibilities. And it's really easy because it's kind of accepting of everything. So I think that's a good point. Steve, did you?
Well, the Apostle Paul has summed up our lesson for us in Romans chapter 1. We can go there. Because
He's good at that.
Paul had this very problem. He had New Agers in Rome that he was dealing with, and he said, God has made himself manifest to his creation in multiple ways through multiple centuries, and man has refused to recognize the evidence that God has presented of himself. And then verse 20 of Romans 1, he says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. So God gave them up to their uncleanness, and they want to think that, go right ahead. But he's talking about people who are conjuring up gods in their own mind.
Yes.
And that's what this New Age movement's all about. They conjure up things to follow after based on human wisdom and the uncertainty and the newness of this, and a different way of thinking, and it's not traditional, and all that sort of thing. Use silly excuses like that. And as you pointed out, none of them were probably grounded in the scriptures to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't bothered to investigate what God has provided for his existence.
And even if they try to connect it to God, it is incredibly mixed with other, and it's more influenced by other standards, other religions, basically, other beliefs. And so again, it's the same issue that's always been. It's just a facelift, except the doctor botched the Botox, and so it's still just as ugly a thing, but it's kind of packaged in what I think is their hopes. It's packaged in a more palatable way, maybe, because, or at least we're not Molech, but it's still idolatry. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, again, and kind of get ahead of myself, I think relativism is a huge foundation for this movement. You can accept anything, and it's very ecumenical. Anybody can be saved, basically, universalist. Now, I'm sure that there are some places where they'd be like, well, no, we wouldn't accept this. But when you open the door, you don't get to stop what's going to walk through. So it very much, while it spouts enlightenment, it's very much just about the same acceptance of really anything. So question 3, who do the ideals of the New Age movement appeal to? One more time? I couldn't hear you. Question 3.
People who feel disconnected from modern life, individuals individuals look to themselves and not to God. They want control like that.
Yeah, especially that last part, I like, they kind of want control, and they do have control, not of the universe, but they have control of what the standards are going to be. And isn't that the whole foundation of this Bible class, is moral issues facing the church? If you don't start with the notion that morality is set by the standard of God, I mean, God is morality. If he's against it, that's what makes it immoral. If it's something that he's for, that's what makes it moral. Very much like God is love. I think God is morality. You take God out of it, and that's one of the problems with the last couple of centuries. The reason that we've gotten to postmodernism and relativism, pluralism, is there really any truth or anything like that? The reason we've gotten there is because of the previous centuries of modernism, which is not just, it's not, well, anything could be true, or is there any truth, but it is the idea at its core that you can come to any standard of truth without bringing God into the equation. That was the start of the postmodern mess. Really, the postmodernism is a cry out against that issue. And I think that's what that brings us back to the main problem here, is that when you try to set God outside of the equation, outside of the discussion, I mean, honestly, what's the point of the discussion? You have no standard, you have no facts, enough facts that you can use that's going to be able to establish at least a standard for both people to agree on. Once God's out of the equation, the discussion doesn't matter anymore. And so we get to control, as Greg was saying at the end there, you get to control really what truth is. You get to control what the belief should be if you've kind of booted God from the whole discussion.
And I think the people that this appeals to are the people that think they're wiser than God. And I say that because I know many times in the people that I study with, we can read something directly from the scripture, directly with the context, everything. And they'll say, well, I don't think that's what it means.
Yeah.
Well, then therefore, you must be wiser than God. And I think that there are so many people, at least that I study with, that feel that way. I don't think that's what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, and you are leaning on your own understanding, which the Proverbs never talk about that, but I'm being facetious. Was there another? I thought I saw one more hand in the back, probably.
Well, people like this, they're looking for something new. They've already rejected traditional religion. They've rejected the Bible. They've rejected this notion of God and that sort of thing. And they're just looking for something. They're looking for something that will satisfy whatever their particular need is. And Brother Williams always used to say, well, if a person looks for something long enough, they'll find it. If you're looking for something specifically, you'll find somebody eventually that will agree with you or that will help you find what you're looking for. I mean, that's just the way the people are.
Yeah, 100%.
And so they're just looking for something other than what they should be looking for.
And I mean, I guess that's always been a temptation of looking for something that's new. Why do we want the ancient paths? Why are we searching for the ancient pattern? Of course, maybe we're getting to a point in our history where that's becoming the new thing. Is you're going to be connected back to an ancient order that started from the beginning. At least, hopefully, we're seeing a pendulum swing back that way. I'm not sure, but.
Kind of buy into this. And when people use the words "I feel" or "I believe," those are the ones that you got an indication of that there's no basis of where they're getting. And you'll see a lot of that in talk shows. A lot of your talk show hosts will use that because then they can have people that they don't necessarily agree with talk like that. And you'll say, well, okay, I see where you're coming from. And then they kind of feel affirmation from that.
Yeah.
And that's very opposite from some of the people that we're seeing now where they're saying, I see where you're at, but that is not what God says.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting how the pendulum goes.
And again, I know this is dated, But it's good to know historical movements, because if you, it's like what I was just talking about. Postmodernism didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a bucking against the ideal that you can come up with, you can come up with the truth without God in the equation. You get to make your own rules. You're the one in control there. And so when you understand the historical backgrounds, you can kind of see where people are coming from and how many, not just people, but institutions have adopted some of those foundational beliefs. So when somebody starts saying stuff like, I feel, that is very new agey, because they're adopting things that maybe they don't even realize they're adopting. And so I think it is a good thing to go through these things with that historical perspective in mind. So, question 3, you could say a lot of different things. Universalists, religious pacifists, people, pluralists, who think all truth is relative, things like that. You could put a lot of people under that category. Question 4, this gets a little bit more technical. He says the following are some of the more common and important New Age beliefs, especially when he was writing this. Explain each one the best that you can. So, who wants to take a stab at pantheism?
The person that believes God and the universe are the same. They see God in everything. They pray to nature, the cosmos, and not to the God. They worship nature.
Yeah, so, honestly, yeah, you even got into some things that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of questions. It's a belief that God and the universe are basically identical, that everything that exists is divine. And one of the reasons these kinds of topics are hard is because they coincide, or maybe they're codependent with other beliefs, or like the belief that God is in every single object. So it's what we read in Romans chapter 1, which I'm glad Steve read that, because we were going to go through that. It's the exact thing that Paul was talking about with the Romans. People who have traded the glory of the creation for the glory of the one who created it. So it's the exact same problem, but just amplified with more and more and more different looks and views of it. But it's the same thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of, and so when people talk about the ancient pantheon, I think that does get to the root of the problem there. It is taking the world around you, looking at it, and trying to put meaning into it by making fantastical stories or adding those things in.
Well, the ancient Greeks and Romans kind of follow this path with their gods and goddesses.
Yes.
They had a god and goddess for every behavior, thing you could think of. So that's sort of pantheism.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the flat earth theory was influenced by this very idea of the pantheon and all the gods that were created. I could be wrong about that, but it would make sense. And wouldn't it just be nice to be able to tell people who believe in flat earth theory that, hey, you believe in some ancient, not the ancient order of God, but you believe in some ancient ideas. Anyway, that's a digression. Anything else? Okay. What about reincarnation? I think is the next term. Yeah, and so that, it's as simple as that. Simple, but it's the idea that there is going to be another life, but it's still going to be on this earth, not a new heavens and a new earth, but it's just going to be, you're constantly in a way, doesn't that just sound awful? Just to constantly, every single generation be born into another timeline of taxes and all of those wonderful things that civilization comes up with. But so you're reincarnated into maybe another body, and karma comes into this. So I'm just going to skip right into karma. What is karma? First of all, before you define it, what ideologies does karma come from?
Hinduism, Buddhism.
Hinduism, Buddhism, yeah. And so does reincarnation, really.
Yeah, and also with reincarnation, they also believe that animals have souls, not just humans. That animals,
Yeah.
they cannot kill certain animals because they are sacred and they have souls. And that is so far
Yeah.
from God's purpose of creation.
Yeah, and so again, there are a lot of tentacles of this in even modern society, because you swat a fly and somebody says, that could have been your great grandpa, or that could have been. I don't think so. But it's just so funny to even think about. But people do believe stuff like that. So you see the tentacles even in modern society. Maybe silly, but there are reasons that people have come to these conclusions. And so, what is karma?
Like I said, a practice of Hinduism, Buddhism, where they think good actions lead to good things and bad actions lead to bad things. It's a cycle.
Yeah. So, incidentally, here's another piece of ammunition against prosperity gospel. I mean, it's basically teaching karma. They're adding this pagan idea. There are a lot of things that they're adding into the Bible, but what are they doing? They're adding something very pagan. They're adding this idea of karma. They may not use that word. That's exactly what they're talking about. If you just do this good thing, then God is going to bless you 100-fold, in a prosperous way. And but it's not the only way that people believe in karma.
And I think it's funny, it's one of those things that a lot of these movements, or a lot of these ideas, they might have some kernel where they've taken things from the Bible. And so the Bible does teach, in Galatians, what you sow, you reap. The Bible throughout talks about the consequences of it. If you do bad things, sooner or later, you're going to have bad things happen.
Exactly.
So you're taking this kind of biblical idea of whatever you sow, you reap. And instead of putting that towards God, it's going to be an ultimate judge that, if you do bad things in your life, there is going to be this force
Yes.
that comes and gives you what you deserve, but it's not some cosmic force.
Yeah.
It's God.
It's not karma, it's justice. But it's justice on a grand scale. And so, like, when you go to Romans 12, I'm glad you brought that up. In Romans 12, in verse 19, when Paul says, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So somebody who believes in this says, well, we basically believe the same thing. It's just in different terms. There's just a couple of distinctions. We both believe that people are going to get their comeuppance, and we both believe that people are going to get their rewards. But do we really? Just because we may, first of all, it's not even landing in the same place. It's not the same. But even if they try to put it in that way, how you get there does matter.
The interesting thing is, you see this mindset in a lot of different places, and it's real heavy, big right now because the Islam faith is growing, and they've kind of adapted some of this karma idea. I know that one of my boys was studying with a Muslim, and he thought that his good would override his bad. So when you start doing that, and there's some type of scale here. When karma comes in, if I have more good than bad, then more good is going to have to be the bad. And if you carry that to its nth degree, then I'm going to have more good, and that means at the end I'm going to have a better place to be when I
Yeah.
die.
So you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit. I think people believe in this not just outright, but they've adopted it without realizing it in a lot of instances. They just think, well, things are going to get better. I think this is something that Christians can fall to. Things have to be getting better because I've been going through the worst of it right now. But lest we forget Paul's thorn in the flesh. Just because you're going through it right now doesn't mean that God is, okay, tomorrow you're finally going to get it. We're not promised what Job got at the end of Job. He didn't even know what was going to happen. And he didn't even know what was happening at the moment. That there's this argument between Satan and God is using Job. He didn't know any of that. And he didn't know that he was going to receive back doubly what he had lost. That's not the promise of Christians. In fact, the promise of Christians often is if If I can use this to my glory, God, then I will, even if it's a thorn in the flesh. But Christians fall prey to the temptation of giving up because they maybe have bought into this idea that the thorn has to be taken out soon. What if it's not? Well, if you believe in karma, then you might just give up. But if you believe in God and his standard, then you might just persevere. We'll do ladies first.
Well, I know he didn't teach on karma, but Jesus taught in a sense, when that one particular lawyer asked him, well, who's my neighbor? Of course, then Jesus goes on in, and of course, we know the story of the Good Samaritan. Well, Jesus is teaching or trying to teach those individuals at that time that this is how you should live, treating your brother, correctly and taking care of your neighbor, and things like that, or doing the good thing. I don't think he taught anything about that.
Yeah, but that's the problem that I was talking about though, is when people come in and they look at a certain passage or teaching like that and say, well, really, we want the same thing. Okay, maybe, but not really. Like, yes, we both want to do good to our neighbor, but one, it matters how you get to a conclusion, and two, it's not the same conclusion because I'm doing this for a different reason than they are, and I'm doing this specifically because God says, if you want to be like me, this is what you got to do. If you want to legitimately integrate my character, then this is how you have to act. This is how you have to be. This is how you have to feel. And the person who just believes in karma, it's nothing about that. It's still going to be selfish. We've got to be careful to make sure that when people do try to come in and say, well, look at this teaching, we don't. And we need to be bold enough to say we don't, and we need to be able to articulate some of the differences. What about altered state? Now we're getting to some fun ones.
Take some drugs, you can get altered state.
Yeah. So that's the main thing I wanted to bring up with this idea. The altered state, higher self, people use this terminology in pretty prominent podcasts today. I reached this altered state after I took a dose of acid. I mean, literally, it's almost always attributed to drugs. So, for everyone in here, I highly doubt anybody would we could just move on because I think it's that. But a lot of people don't see the issues with some of these drugs like LSD and all these things because, well, all it's doing, it's a spiritual tool to help me be more spiritual. See why this conversation matters? Because even if some of the information may be dated, some of the definitions may be dated, they've adapted a little bit, the foundations are still there, and we've got to be able to pick those apart. And I mean it, vigorously pick them apart with extreme prejudice, because the way that drugs are talked about on prevalent podcasts today in America it really is a spiritual tool. It's not something that's going to kill you. It's not something that's going to hurt your brain and cause worse effects in the latter half. And I guarantee that Steve can talk about all of the hardcore damage that these things do to you. But ultimately, this is how it's defined. It's just a spiritual tool. Okay. Everything's a spiritual tool. But you can use a spiritual tool for the devil's sake or for God's sake. And in this case, you're using it for the devil. You just are. And again, that's kind of have to switch gears and talk about drugs and the difference between medicinal purposes and just recreational drugs. But any extra thoughts?
Well, there's some common practices today that could border on this. For example, yoga. For example, meditation. Some of these things can be done maybe to help improve your health, maybe help people relax. They may have some sort of anxiety problem, and they need to have their brains focused on more positive thoughts to help them to relax, to help prevent panic attacks and that sort of thing. Or yoga, the meditation that's associated with that, and the relaxation techniques to help maybe improve the mobility of your body. Some of that can kind of border on this out-of-body experience thing that doesn't necessarily have to be drug-induced.
Yeah.
It could be person-induced. And the other thing on this karma business, I think this notion of fate is
Oh, yeah.
connected with that.
That's
In
a good
other
point.
words, certain actions are going to necessarily result in a certain consequence. It doesn't matter it's right or wrong. It's just the action itself.
Yeah.
The outcome is built into the action. And so here you have fate coming in. People say, well, fate tells me this is going to, I mean, seriously? But that's part of it.
And so I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is a good tie-in of the idea of fate. Now, I know sometimes people can use words metaphorically, but there are a lot of people who would say, it's a very karma-ish idea that, well, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. But we're not talking about physics here. We're talking about more personal things and even with decision making.
Awakening from the altered states, I got awakening conscious states to different perspectives of reality. I wonder how they do that.
Yeah, well, it's not good how they do that, but that's altered state, higher self. That's kind of one of the main parts that I wanted to focus in on, particularly. How you get there is pretty disturbing in a lot of ways. Not all the time, but most of the time. But also, it's the promise. It's the promise involved with these things. We're trying to unlock your potential, and we are trying to get you to heighten your senses and heighten your awareness. I mean, that's, I think, literally the technical definition of altered state. A mental state or mental states different from ordinary waking awareness, often induced through meditation, chanting, hypnosis, drugs, or trance techniques. So the belief is that the mind is being open to higher realities or an expanded awareness. Well, that seems pretty special. I'd feel pretty unique if nobody else is doing this. That's what everybody says. Nobody else is doing this. I'm gonna be heightened compared to everybody else. I'm gonna be enlightened. And maybe that's a word that we need to use more, is because it hasn't that been the temptation for man for all time. And it's not just in the more silly of beliefs, but it's in the more sober beliefs. No matter what, we're being enlightened without God. But what does God say about if you really want to be enlightened?
Be filled with the Spirit.
Yeah.
Check Ephesians 5. Don't be drunken with wine. We can say don't be high on LSD. I mean, you can substitute a lot of things without abusing the text. Be filled with the Spirit. I mean, that's not something that man conjures up on his own. That's something he learns about and grows in, like we're trying to do this year, growing in the Spirit.
Exactly. And how many times does Peter alone talk about sobriety and being sober-minded? And you can't be sober if you drink alcohol. If you can't be sober if you take these drugs. You can't be sober if you're in a trance. And so maybe that's an argument to be made, is that if the only way that you can get to these enlightened, heightened senses is through some kind of not natural, not wisdom, but through drugs. I come back to the tried and true quote from Princess Bride. When people use enlightenment, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. They're enlightened, but because they lit up.
Steve popped a thought in my head too, because we can do this without going to drugs. He mentioned yoga and some other things, but we got to be careful with how we use our entertainment.
Yeah.
With how we do. I mean, we have people that are daredevils, and there's God-given
Just natural reactions.
Natural stuff that allow you to get that enlightenment, if you will. And when you stop doing that, then other things happen. I know a guy that was a real good athlete, and he had the joy of, and that euphoria of being better than everybody else.
Yeah.
And when he stopped, he had to find something else, and he just recently passed with methamphetamine overdose. So it's one of those things where the self-medication comes when God's stuff stops. and so we got to be, I think it's a great.
Well, what are they called? Is it dopamine addicts or something like that? Where
Endorphins.
Yeah, where they're constantly chasing danger because and I mean, it affects the brain. uh, and even with just education, I think there are people who think like you don't have to just use drugs. It's the mindset that I am enlightened beyond everybody else because I have this specific philosophy or this specific education. Coming back to Colossians 2, it could just be philosophy where we've reached an altered state because I'm willing to accept this truth when no one else is. And so it doesn't just have to be the worst kinds of drugs. It could be getting addicted to certain feelings or emotions, or physical highs, or it could just be philosophy that we have made our God.
Topics that will be here recently, all these areas, like somebody's been doing drugs, like mushrooms.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by some of these podcasts. They especially talk about the shrooms. Yeah, and so speaking of that higher self, pun intended. What is how do you define higher self?
Utilize spiritual aspects of yourself, exist beyond the ego, and daily concerns.
Yeah, so I had the idea that within each person lies a divine or enlightened aspect, the true self that is one with God, not the creator, but the universe. So again, it's very paganistic. It's very idolatrous. Um, and doesn't that just make sense? Because what are people doing? They're leaning on their own understanding. They've made a God out of being isolated from the creator, being not dependent on him, but we're independent. And again, you get to make your own rules. You're the one in control when you've abandoned God in the conversation. So getting into some of these practices, we've talked about some of the beliefs. Here are some of the practices. Meditation. What did you put there?
Mind-body practice, achieving greater awareness, clarity, and mental well-being.
Yeah, so I mean, in our current climate in the culture, is meditation defined in the same way by everybody? No, I mean, for some people, meditation is just sitting down and taking deep breaths because they've gotten really frustrated. In fact, that's what I teach my almost 3-year-old. When you get frustrated, you gotta separate yourself from the situation, take a few breaths, chill out. I don't think that is exactly what the author is maybe talking about or indicating here. It's not the idea of trying to calm yourself when you get frustrated, but it's more aligned or tied to this New Age movement. So what I had was in the New Age movement, meditation often means emptying the mind to achieve peace, awareness, or union with the divine. I think that's more along the lines of where the author's trying to get to. Yes, ma'am.
Look, I think it's important though that when we do talk about meditation, and I understand that with the New Age movement, it's speaking differently than what we consider. But the Apostle Paul, I think says it so well in Philippians 4:8 for the Christians. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, which is moral excellence. That's what virtue means. And if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. Well, I think the New Age people think that this will bring, their type of meditation will bring them peace.
Yeah.
But the Apostle Paul tells us exactly what will bring us peace and how we are to meditate.
Yeah, and so like when you hear in the movie or the show, whatever the actors are saying, they're usually making fun of the kind of hippie-esque people. They're like, clear your thoughts, clear your minds, and align your energy with the universes and let it fill your mind. That's the sillier version, which it is silly, and I think a lot of people believe that idea. But do I ever Do I ever want to empty my mind of everything? I mean, it makes sense that they say that, because if you empty your mind, you're going to empty your mind of everything that God has said. That it's not that we want to empty our mind of everything. Let's empty our mind of maybe the worldly temptations, the worldly distractions, and focus in on Him. And Philippians 4:8 is a good example of that, or Psalm 1, where he talks about what the righteous man does. He meditates on God's law. He meditates on God's commandments. He meditates on the things that He says.
Day and night.
Yeah, and so meditation, it just depends on how you define the word or how you're using it. I want to be someone who meditates on God's word. Wouldn't that be beautiful if when we talk about meditation, it just meant people sat quietly and listened. I'm not trying to do away with prayer. We need to talk to God, but I don't want to be the person who only talks to God and never listens. And how do we listen? We listen through what He's given us, through the word. So yeah. And so it's not just dwell on these things. Exactly. You're not definitionally dwelling on these things, definitionally, if you're not going to integrate them. And so very strong parallel, and a little preview for tonight's lesson. So, stay tuned. But so it kind of just depends on what people mean by meditation.
I'm sure there are phrases that are associated with modern day meditation. I am learning. There's a lot of I stuff going on.
Yeah.
God is.
That's the mantra.
Right. So the focus where it is certainly not where it should be.
It reminded me of in the funny papers. There's a guy that was trying to do yoga, or everyone was doing their chants or whatever they were doing. All I can't remember who it was, but I think it was the old guy. I can't remember his name, but he was just like, question mark, and it really is. It's confusing a lot of times.
It's interesting that when you meditate improperly, you're emptying yourself to be able to receive the seed.
Yeah.
That's the difference. When you're meditating on these things, you're meditating on things that are true for transformation.
Yeah.
There's a difference between going for the seed or transformation.
And that's a good invitation, because it's like the people who accept these ideologies, they're looking for something. Every statement is a value statement, and everyone is looking for something. And what we could use this as an invitation for is to say, you're looking for enlightenment. You're looking for something beneficial, meaningful to fill your mind. But what you're doing is emptying your mind to accept things that are only going to make things worse, or at the very least make you feel numb, which ultimately will make things worse. And so what we can come in and say is, okay, what if I could offer you something, God? What if we could offer you something where you're emptying your mind of all of the bad things? Because something's going to fill it. But you can be filled with purity. You could be filled with innocence, with holiness. You could be filled with the Spirit, like Steve was saying in Ephesians chapter 5. So we'll continue those thoughts next Sunday. This Wednesday is our singing. So make sure you have, if you didn't get all the sheets for the lesson, they're still back there. Make sure you have all of them for Sunday.